Thomas Martinez sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at his guitar as if it were a stranger. The instrument that had once been his closest companion now felt cold and foreign in his hands. 3 months had passed since he had written a single note, and the silence was becoming unbearable. The walls around him were covered with old concert posters, music awards, photographs from better times when his songs had topped the charts and filled stadiums with devoted fans at 34 years old. Thomas had experienced both the highest peaks and lowest valleys of the music industry. 5 years earlier, he had been one of the most promising singer-songwriters of his generation. His debut album had gone platinum, his second had earned critical acclaim, and record labels had competed for his signature. Music critics had praised his ability to capture raw human emotion in his lyrics, and fans had connected deeply with his authentic storytelling. Then everything had fallen apart in the span of a single year. His longtime girlfriend and creative muse, Rebecca, had left him for his former best friend and bandmate. The betrayal had shattered not only his heart, but also his ability to trust and create. His third album, written in the depths of his pain, had been a commercial disaster. Critics called it self-indulgent and bitter, and radio stations refused to play the songs. His record label had dropped him. His management team had abandoned him. His remaining band members had found work with other artists. The financial consequences had been swift and devastating, without steady income from touring or album sales. Thomas had been forced to sell his house, his expensive equipment, and most of his possessions. He had moved from his spacious home studio to this tiny apartment in a rundown neighborhood, where the rent was affordable, but the dreams felt impossible. Thomas picked up his acoustic guitar and strummed a few chords, but the sound felt hollow and meaningless. His fingers, once nimble and confident, moved awkwardly across the strings. The melodies that used to flow naturally from his mind seemed trapped behind a wall of self-doubt and creative paralysis. He set the guitar aside and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below where people hurried past without knowing or caring about his struggles. The apartment building housed an eclectic mix of residents. Young professionals rushed to work each morning. Elderly couples sat on their small balconies in the evenings, and families with children filled the hallways with laughter and occasional arguments. Thomas had become somewhat of a hermit, rarely interacting with his neighbors beyond polite nods in the elevator or hallway. His days had fallen into a depressing routine. He would wake up late, check his nearly empty email inbox hoping for work opportunities that never came, and spend hours browsing music industry websites and social media platforms. Seeing his former colleagues and competitors achieving success only deepened his sense of failure and isolation. He had started taking odd jobs to pay rent, delivering food, doing basic handyman work, anything that would provide a few dollars without requiring him to explain his fall from musical stardom. The evenings were the worst. That was when Thomas felt most alone with his thoughts and regrets. He would order cheap takeout food and eat while watching television shows that failed to distract him from his problems. Sometimes he would pull out old recordings of his successful songs, listening to them with a mixture of nostalgia and disbelief that he had once been capable of creating something so meaningful. His family had tried to help during the early months of his decline, but Thomas had pushed them away out of pride and shame. His parents, who had always been supportive of his musical career, had offered financial assistance and emotional support. His sister had repeatedly invited him to stay with her family until he got back on his feet, but Thomas had refused all offers, insisting that he needed to solve his problems independently. The isolation had taken a toll on his physical and mental health. Thomas had lost weight from poor eating habits and lack of appetite. His sleep schedule was erratic, often staying awake until dawn and then sleeping through most of the day. He had stopped exercising, stopped socializing, and had even stopped listening to music for pleasure. The art form that had once defined his identity now served as a painful reminder of everything he had lost. Despite his current circumstances, Thomas couldn't completely abandon hope that his creativity would return. Deep down, he knew that music was more than just his career, it was part of his soul. The songs he had written during his successful years had come from genuine places of emotion and experience. That ability to translate life into melody and lyrics had to still exist somewhere within him. even if it felt buried under layers of pain and disappointment. Thomas had tried various methods to jumpstart his creativity. He had experimented with different musical styles, attempted to collaborate with unknown local musicians, and even tried writing songs about his current struggles. Nothing had worked. Every melody sounded derivative, every lyric felt forced, and every attempt at recording ended in frustration and self-criticism. The apartment's thin walls meant that Thomas could hear fragments of his neighbors' lives: children practicing piano, couples arguing and making up, elderly residents playing old records from their youth. These sounds of human experience surrounded him, yet he felt unable to translate them into the musical stories that had once been his specialty. As another day ended without progress, Thomas made himself a simple dinner and sat at his small kitchen table. The guitar leaned against the wall nearby, waiting for him to find the courage and inspiration to pick it up again. He knew that his musical career might be over forever, but something deep inside him refused to give up completely. The sound of footsteps in the hallway and the gentle closing of a door reminded Thomas that life was continuing around him. Somewhere in the building, people were living their stories, experiencing joys and sorrows that could inspire beautiful music if he could only find a way to connect with them again. Tomorrow would bring another opportunity to try another chance. To discover whether the music still lived within him, Thomas finished his meal and prepared for another restless night, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. The next morning, Thomas was awakened by an unfamiliar sound drifting through his apartment walls. Someone was playing piano, but it wasn't the hesitant practice sessions of the children he usually heard. This was different, confident, flowing, and hauntingly beautiful. The melody was complex yet accessible, with an emotional depth that immediately captured his attention. Thomas sat up in bed and listened intently. The music seemed to be coming from the apartment next door, which had been vacant for several weeks. He had noticed moving trucks the previous evening but hadn't paid much attention to his new neighbor's arrival. Now, as the piano continued its graceful dance through scales and improvised passages, Thomas felt something stirring inside him that he hadn't experienced in months. The playing stopped abruptly, leaving Thomas wanting more. He found himself disappointed by the silence and realized this was the first time in months that he had genuinely wanted to hear music continue. For the rest of the morning, he found himself listening for the piano to resume, but his new neighbor seemed to have finished her practice session. That afternoon, Thomas encountered her in the building's small lobby. She was a woman in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She was struggling with several grocery bags while trying to check her mailbox, and Thomas instinctively moved to help her. "Thank you so much," she said with a warm smile as Thomas took some of her bags. "I'm still getting used to managing everything in a new place." "I'm Elena Rossetti, by the way. I just moved into apartment 4B. Thomas Martinez," he replied, feeling slightly awkward after months of minimal social interaction. "I'm in for a right next door." "I heard you playing piano this morning. You're very talented." Lena's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Oh, I hope I wasn't disturbing anyone." "I try to practice at reasonable hours, but sometimes I get so absorbed in the music that I lose track of time." "Are you a musician too?" "There's something about the way you mention the piano that suggests you understand music." Thomas hesitated, unsure how to explain his complicated relationship with his former career. "I used to be," he said simply. "I don't play much anymore." "That's a shame," Elena said, as they walked toward the elevator together. "Music is too precious to abandon completely. Maybe you just need to find a new way to connect with it." Words stayed with Thomas long after they had parted ways at their respective apartment doors. That evening, Elena's piano playing resumed, and Thomas found himself sitting by the thin wall that separated their apartments, listening with an attention he hadn't given to music in months. Her repertoire seemed extensive, ranging from classical pieces to jazz standards to what sounded like original compositions. The original pieces particularly intrigued Thomas. Elena's compositions had a narrative quality that reminded him of his own songwriting approach during his successful years. Her melodies told stories, painted emotional landscapes, and created connections between performer and listener that went beyond technical skill. Over the following days, Thomas began to structure his schedule around Elena's practice sessions. He would position himself near the shared wall during her morning and evening playing times, allowing her music to wash over him like a gentle therapy session. Her playing seemed to unlock something that had been frozen inside him since his creative block began. Thomas found himself humming Elena's melodies while doing mundane tasks around his apartment. For the first time in months, musical phrases were naturally occurring to him. He began to hear potential lyrics floating through his mind as Elena's piano provided soundtrack to his daily activities. The creative paralysis that had gripped him so tightly was beginning to show signs of loosening its hold. One evening, Thomas worked up the courage to pick up his guitar while Elena played next door. He didn't attempt to play along with her music, but simply held the instrument and allowed his fingers to move across the strings without pressure or expectation. The guitar felt less foreign in his hands, more like the old friend it had once. As days passed, Thomas realized that Elena's presence in the building had subtly changed the entire atmosphere. Her music seemed to inspire other residents as well. The elderly couple on the third floor had started playing their old vinyl records more frequently, and even the children's piano practice sessions sounded more enthusiastic and focused. Thomas began to pay attention to Elena's schedule and movements throughout the building. She seemed to work irregular hours, often leaving with a large bag that looked like it might contain sheet music or other musical materials. Sometimes she returned late in the evening looking tired but satisfied, as if she had spent her day doing meaningful work. His curiosity about Elena's musical background and current activities grew stronger each day. During their brief encounters, in the hallway or lobby, Thomas found himself wanting to ask about her compositions, her training, and what had brought her to this particular apartment building. However, his months of isolation had made him rusty at casual conversation, and he worried about seeming intrusive or awkward. One afternoon, Thomas overheard Elena talking on her phone in the hallway. She was discussing a performance at a local community center, mentioning something about bringing music to people who might not otherwise have access to live performances. Her voice carried a passion and sense of purpose that Thomas recognized from his own early days as a musician, when the art form had felt like a calling rather than just a career. That evening, Elena's piano playing took on a different quality. Her usual graceful technique was accompanied by what sounded like vocal warm-ups and occasional singing. Thomas pressed his ear closer to the wall, trying to catch fragments of her voice. When she sang, her tone was clear and expressive, with a natural ability to convey emotion that complemented her piano skills perfectly, for the first time since his creative block had begun. Thomas felt inspired to write. He grabbed a notebook and began scribbling down words and phrases that Elena's music suggested to him. The lyrics weren't complete songs yet. They were genuine expressions of feeling rather than the forced attempts he had been making for months. As Thomas wrote, he realized that Elena's music was teaching him something important about his own creative process. Her playing never seemed to struggle or strain for effect. Instead, it flowed naturally from genuine emotion and technical skill working together, harmoniously. This was the approach Thomas had used during his successful years. Before heartbreak and commercial pressure had complicated his relationship with music, that night, Thomas fell asleep with his notebook beside him and Elena's melodies still echoing in his mind. He dreamed of music for the first time in months, and when he woke the next morning, he found himself looking forward to hearing his neighbor's piano again. Something fundamental was shifting inside him, and he sensed that Elena's presence was catalyzing a transformation he desperately needed. 3 weeks after Elena had moved in next door, Thomas made a decision that surprised him with its boldness. He had been listening to her practice a particularly beautiful piece that seemed to tell the story of someone overcoming great sadness, and he found himself deeply moved by the emotional journey her music created. Without allowing himself time to reconsider, Thomas picked up his guitar and began playing a simple accompaniment to Elena's piano. The music from next door stopped abruptly. Thomas immediately felt foolish and embarrassed, certain that he had intruded on Elena's private practice time. He set his guitar aside and waited for the inevitable knock on his door, preparing to apologize for his presumptuous behavior. Instead, after a moment of silence, Elena's piano resumed playing the same piece. But this time, she played it more slowly, and deliberately, as if she was inviting Thomas to join her again. Tentatively, he picked up his guitar and found the chord progression that would complement her melody. This time, Elena didn't stop playing. Instead, she seemed to adjust her tempo and dynamics to blend with his guitar work. For 10 magical minutes, Thomas and Elena created music together through the thin apartment wall. Neither could see the other, but their instruments spoke to each other in perfect harmony. When the improvised session finally ended, Thomas felt more alive and connected than he had in months. His hands were shaking slightly from the excitement of collaborative creation after so much isolation. The next morning, Thomas found a note that had been slipped under his door. In elegant handwriting, Elena had written, "Thank you for the beautiful guitar work yesterday evening. Your musical instincts are remarkable. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee to discuss music? I have a feeling we might inspire each other." Elena, apartment for B. Thomas, read the note several times, feeling both thrilled and terrified by the invitation. His social skills had deteriorated during his months of isolation, and he worried about explaining his current circumstances to someone who seemed so confident and accomplished. However, his desire to connect with another musician and explore the creative spark Elena had ignited was stronger than his fear of embarrassment. They met at a small cafe near their apartment building the following afternoon. Elena arrived carrying a worn leather bag that Thomas assumed contained sheet music or other musical materials. She was dressed casually, but there was something about her presence that suggested both artistic sensitivity and practical competence. "I'm so glad you decided to come," Elena said as they settled at a corner table. "I've been curious about my mysterious neighbor who plays guitar so beautifully. When I heard you yesterday, I could tell you have real musical depth and experience." Thomas felt compelled to be honest about his situation, even though it meant revealing his professional failures. "I used to be a recording artist," he explained carefully. "I had some success a few years ago, but things didn't work out. I've been going through a rough period creatively." Rather than expressing pity or asking probing questions about his decline, Elena nodded with understanding. "Creative blocks can be devastating," she said simply. "I've been there myself. Sometimes we need to find new ways to connect with our musical selves." Elena explained that she was a music therapist who worked with various community organizations, bringing musical experiences to people in hospitals, senior centers, and schools. Her work required both technical skill and emotional intelligence, helping people use music to process feelings, build connections, and find healing. "Music has incredible power to heal and transform," Elena continued. "I've seen it help people through grief, depression, trauma, and isolation. Sometimes the most profound musical experiences happen when we stop worrying about perfection and focus on authentic expression." As they talked, Thomas realized that Elena's approach to music was fundamentally different from the commercial environment he had known during his successful years. She wasn't concerned with chart positions, record sales, or critical reviews. Instead, she focused on music's ability to create meaningful connections between people and help them navigate life's challenges. Elena described some of her recent projects, including weekly sessions at a retirement home where she helped elderly residents share stories through song, and a program at a children's hospital where music provided comfort and distraction during medical treatments. Her eyes lit up as she spoke about these experiences, revealing a passion that had nothing to do with fame or financial success. "I have an idea," Elena said as their conversation continued. "I'm starting a new project, informal evening concerts, in community spaces for people who might not normally attend musical events. Nothing fancy, just intimate performances that bring people together around music. Would you be interested in helping me develop this program?" Thomas felt both excited and anxious about Elena's proposal. The idea of performing again, even in a small, informal setting, was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. His confidence as a performer had been shattered along with his commercial career. He wasn't sure he could handle even a small audience. "I don't know if I'm ready for public performance," Thomas admitted. "I haven't played in front of people in over a year, and I'm not sure my skills are what they used to be." Elena reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "Exactly why this might be perfect for you," she said. "These wouldn't be high-pressure performances. The goal isn't perfection, it's connection. The people who come to these events are looking for authentic musical experiences, not polished entertainment. She explained her vision more specifically. The concerts would take place in informal settings like community center lounges, library, meeting rooms, or even outdoor spaces during good weather. The audiences would be small and diverse: elderly residents, young families, people going through difficult times who might benefit from musical community. Music becomes more meaningful when it serves a purpose beyond self-expression, Alina continued. When you know your music is helping someone else feel less alone or providing comfort during a difficult time, it takes the focus off your own fears and insecurities. Thomas found Alina's perspective both challenging and inspiring. He had always written and performed music that was deeply personal. But during his successful years, the commercial aspects had gradually overshadowed the human connections his music could create. Alina was offering him a way to rediscover why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Before leaving the cafe, Thomas agreed to attend one of Alina's existing music therapy sessions to better understand her approach. She invited him to observe her work at a local senior center the following week, emphasizing that he would simply be watching and listening rather than participating. As they walked back to their apartment building, Thomas felt a cautious optimism about the future for the first time in months. Alina's presence in his life was already transforming his relationship with music, helping him see possibilities he hadn't considered during his darkest period. That evening, Thomas picked up his guitar with renewed purpose. Instead of struggling to write commercial songs or dwelling on his past failures, he began exploring musical ideas that felt genuine and emotionally honest. Alina's piano practice session next door provided a comforting backdrop to his own tentative creative experiments. 4. The first time since his world had collapsed, Thomas began to believe that his musical journey might not be over after all. The following Tuesday, Thomas accompanied Alina to Sunset Manor, a senior living facility where she conducted weekly music therapy sessions. As they walked through the building's cheerful corridors, Alina explained that many of the residents suffered from various forms of dementia, depression, or social isolation that music could help address. "You'll be amazed at how people respond to music," Alina told him as they approached the activity room. "I've seen residents who haven't spoken in weeks suddenly start singing along to songs from their youth. Music reaches parts of the brain and heart that other forms of communication can't touch." The activity room was filled with about 15 elderly residents sitting in a semicircle of chairs. Some appeared alert and engaged, while others seemed withdrawn or confused. Thomas felt nervous about intruding on their therapeutic space, but Alina introduced him simply as a musician friend who was interested in learning about music therapy. Alina began the session by playing gentle, familiar melodies on a portable keyboard she had brought. She started with songs from the 1940s and 1950s. Watching the residents' faces for signs of recognition or engagement, Thomas was fascinated to see how certain melodies immediately brightened some faces and caused others to begin moving their heads or tapping their feet in rhythm. "Does anyone remember this song?" Lena asked as she played the opening notes of Moonlight Serenade. An elderly woman named Dorothy immediately began humming along, and soon several other residents had joined in. Alina encouraged them to sing whatever words they remembered, creating a gentle chorus of voices that filled the room with warmth. As the session progressed, Lena invited residents to share memories associated with particular songs. Harold, a retired mechanic in his 80s, became animated when Alina played Route 66, describing road trips he had taken with his late wife. Margaret, who usually remained silent during activities, began telling stories about dancing to big band music. During World War II, Thomas watched in amazement as music unlocked memories, emotions, and connections that had seemed dormant or lost. Alina skillfully guided the conversations, using the residents' responses to choose the next song or activity. She had an intuitive understanding of when to encourage participation and when to simply let the music speak for itself. "Would anyone like to make a request?" Lena asked near the end of the session. A shy woman named Rose raised her hand tentatively and whispered something Thomas couldn't hear. Alina nodded and began playing Amazing Grace with a gentle, reverent touch. Rose began singing in a clear, beautiful voice that surprised everyone in the room. As she continued, other residents joined in, creating a spontaneous choir that brought tears to Thomas's eyes. He realized he was witnessing something profound: music serving its most essential purpose of bringing people together and helping them express feelings that words alone couldn't convey. After the session ended, they were walking back to Elena's car. Thomas felt deeply moved by what he had experienced. "That was incredible," he told Elena. "I had no idea music could have such a direct impact on people's well-being." Those residents seemed like completely different people when they were singing. Elena smiled with satisfaction. That's the power of music when it's used to serve others rather than just entertain them. Every person in that room has lived through decades of experiences, and music helps them access and share those memories. It gives them dignity and connection. On the drive home, Elena explained more about her background and training. She had studied both classical piano performance and music therapy, initially planning to pursue a concert career, but gradually realizing that her true calling lay in using music to help others heal and grow. "I still love performing," Elena said, "but I've found that music becomes more meaningful when it has a purpose beyond my own self-expression. When I see someone like Rose find her voice again through singing, it reminds me why music exists in the first place." That evening, Thomas found himself thinking about Elena's words as he sat with his guitar. He began playing some of the songs from the therapy session, trying to understand how those simple melodies had created such powerful emotional responses. As he played, he started imagining how his own songs might serve similar purposes, not just expressing his personal experiences, but helping others process their own emotions and memories. Over the next few days, Thomas began writing again with renewed focus and purpose. Instead of trying to recreate his past commercial successes, he focused on creating music that might provide comfort or connection to people going through difficult times. The lyrics came more naturally when he stopped thinking about impressing critics or radio programmers and started considering how his words might resonate with someone who felt lost or alone. Elena noticed the change in Thomas's guitar playing through their shared wall. His music had become more purposeful and emotionally direct, less focused on technical complexity and more concerned with authentic expression. When she complimented him on this evolution, Thomas credited her influence and the eye-opening experience. At Sunset Manor, "I think I've been approaching music backwards," Thomas admitted during one of their coffee meetings. "I was so focused on external validation and commercial success that I forgot why I started writing songs in the first place. Watching you work with those residents reminded me that music's real power lies in its ability to connect people and help them feel understood." Lena encouraged Thomas to continue developing this new approach to his songwriting. She suggested that he might eventually be ready to share his music with small, supportive audiences who would appreciate authentic expression over polished performance. The idea still made Thomas nervous, but he was beginning to believe that performing for the right reasons with the right audience might actually help his healing process. As weeks passed, Thomas and Elena began collaborating more directly on musical projects. She would share melodies she was developing for therapy sessions, and he would suggest harmonic accompaniments or lyrical ideas. Their creative partnership felt natural and productive, built on mutual respect and shared values about music's purpose. One evening, Elena made a suggestion that both excited and terrified Thomas. "I think you might be ready to help me with one of my community concerts," she said. "Nothing overwhelming, maybe just one song to start. I have a performance scheduled at the public library next month, and I think your music would be perfect for that audience." Thomas felt his old fears rising. What if he forgot the words, played wrong chords, or simply wasn't good enough after so many months away from performing? But he also felt something new, a desire to share his music, not for fame or recognition, but because it might genuinely help someone else feel less alone. "What kind of song do you think would work best?" Thomas asked, surprising himself by not immediately declining the invitation. Elena smiled, recognizing that Thomas was taking a crucial step toward reclaiming his musical identity. "Something honest and hopeful," she said. "Something that tells people they're not alone in whatever they're going through. I think you have exactly the right song inside you. You just need to trust yourself enough to share it." That night, Thomas sat with his guitar and began working on a new song that would be written specifically for Elena's library concert. For the first time since his career had collapsed, he was writing music intended to serve others, rather than advance his own ambitions. The difference in his creative process was remarkable. Instead of struggling and forcing, the music flowed naturally from his genuine desire to connect and comfort, as he worked late into the night. Thomas could hear Elena's piano through the wall playing softly, as if she was accompanying his creative process from next door. Together, they were creating something beautiful and meaningful. Thomas began to believe that his musical future might be brighter than he had dared to hope. The day of the library concert arrived with unseasonably warm weather that seemed to mirror Thomas's cautious optimism about performing again. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, practicing the song he had written specifically for this audience, a gentle ballad about finding hope during dark times that he had titled Through the Night. Elena had arranged for the concert to take place in the library's community room, a cozy space with large windows that overlooked a small garden. About 40 people had gathered for the evening performance, including elderly couples, young families, and individuals who seemed to be seeking some form of musical connection or comfort. As Thomas set up his guitar and adjusted the simple microphone Elena had provided, he felt the familiar pre-performance anxiety that had once been routine during his touring days. However, this nervousness felt different, less about his own ego and reputation, more about his desire to offer something meaningful to the people who had chosen to spend their evening listening to music. Elena opened the concert with a solo piano piece that immediately established an atmosphere of intimacy and warmth. Her playing was technically excellent but never showed off. Every note served the emotional content of the music. Thomas watched from the side of the small stage area, marveling at how naturally she connected with the audience without saying more than a few words. Music has the power to remind us that we're not alone in our experiences, Elena told the audience as she transitioned between pieces. Tonight, we want to share some songs that celebrate the human connections that sustain us through both joyful and difficult times. She performed 3 more solo pieces, each carefully chosen to create different emotional textures: a playful jazz standard that made several audience members smile, a classical piece that showcased the piano's dynamic range, and a contemporary, the song she had written herself about the beauty found in everyday moments. When Elena introduced Thomas to the audience, she kept her comments simple and supportive. "I'd like you to meet my friend and neighbor Thomas Martinez, a gifted songwriter who understands how music can speak to our deepest experiences. He's going to share a song that I think will resonate with many of you." Thomas walked to the microphone with his guitar, looking out at faces that reflected attention and openness rather than judgment or expectation. He realized that this audience had come seeking authentic musical connection, not polished entertainment. That understanding helped calm his nerves and focus his attention on the message he wanted to convey through his song. "This song is called Through the Night, Thomas," said, his voice steadier than he had expected. "It's about the moments when life feels overwhelming, and how we can find strength by remembering that dawn always follows darkness, and that we don't have to face our struggles alone." As Thomas began playing the opening chords, he felt the familiar magic of musical performance. The way time seemed to slow down, and the connection between performer and audience became almost tangible. His voice, rusty from months of disuse, found its strength as he sang lyrics that came from his recent experiences of loss and gradual healing. The song's verses describe the isolation and despair that follow major life setbacks. But the chorus offered hope and community through the night, through the fear. Through the doubt that holds you down, there are hands reaching out. There are hearts that understand you're not walking alone through the night. Thomas could see audience members responding to the song in real time. An elderly man in the front row was nodding along with the rhythm, his eyes closed as if he was connecting with personal memories. A young woman near the back had tears in her eyes but seemed comforted rather than distressed by the emotional content. When the song ended, the applause was warm and sustained, but more importantly, Thomas could sense that his music had genuinely touched people. Several audience members wiped their eyes, and the room felt filled with a kind of collective emotional release that Thomas had rarely experienced during his commercial performing days. Alina returned to the stage for a duet they had arranged, a beautiful folk song about community and mutual support that showcased their natural musical chemistry. Performing with Alina felt effortless and joyful, their voices blending harmoniously while their instruments provided a supportive foundation. For the melody after the formal concert ended, several audience members approached Thomas to thank him personally for his song. Margaret, a widow in her 70s, told him that Through the Night had perfectly captured her feelings since her husband's death 6 months earlier. A young father named David explained that the song had given him hope during a period of unemployment and family stress. "Your music reminded me that I'm not the only person who has felt lost and scared," David said, shaking Thomas's hand warmly. "Sometimes we need to hear that from someone else before we can believe it ourselves." These personal responses to his music affected Thomas more deeply than any review or commercial success from his previous career. He realized that Alina had been right about music's true purpose. It was most powerful when it served to connect people and help them feel understood, rather than simply entertained. As they packed up their equipment after the concert, Alina complimented Thomas on his performance and the audience's obvious connection to his song. "You were wonderful tonight," she said. "I could see how much your music meant to people, and I could tell that performing for them meant something important to you too." Thomas nodded, still processing the evening's emotional impact. "I feel like I remembered why I started writing songs in the first place," he said. "When I was younger, before the record deals and commercial pressure, I wrote music because it helped me make sense of my experiences and connect with other people. Tonight felt like coming home to that original motivation." On the drive back to their apartment building, Thomas and Alina talked about future performance opportunities. Alina had several more community concerts scheduled and invited Thomas to participate in as many as he felt comfortable with. She also suggested that he might enjoy volunteering with some of her music therapy programs, particularly those focused on helping adults navigate life transitions and emotional challenges. "I think you have a gift for creating music that helps people feel less alone," Alina told him as they climbed the stairs to their apartments. "That's not something that can be taught or manufactured. It comes from your own experiences with struggle and healing." That night, Thomas sat in his apartment, thinking about the evening's events and what they meant for his future. For months, he had viewed his career collapse as an ending, a failure that had permanently damaged his relationship with music. Now he was beginning to understand that it might have been a necessary transition, clearing away commercial expectations and external pressures so he could rediscover music's deeper purposes. He picked up his guitar and began working on another song, inspired by the connections he had felt with the library audience. The melodies came naturally, and the lyrics focused on themes of community, resilience, and the ways people support each other through difficult times. As he played, Thomas could hear Alina's piano through the wall, not practicing formal pieces this time, but improvising gentle melodies that seemed to complement his own creative work. Their musical partnership continued even when they were in separate spaces, each inspiring the other to explore new possibilities. Thomas was beginning to envision a future that looked very different from his former career, but felt more authentic and fulfilling than anything he had previously experienced. Music was becoming his tool for service rather than his path to fame, and that shift was transforming both his artistry and his understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. 2 years after that first library concert, Thomas stood on the small stage of the community center, where he and Alina now held monthly performances. The room was packed with familiar faces, people who had become part of their extended musical family over the months of shared concerts, workshops, and healing sessions. What had started as Alina's simple idea had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Thomas looked out at the audience and saw Margaret, the widow who had been so moved by his first performance. She now helped organize the concerts, and had even begun writing her own songs about love and loss. David, the unemployed father who had found hope in Thomas's music, sat in the front row with his family. He had not only found a new job, but had started learning guitar himself. Inspired by Thomas's journey from despair to purpose, the program had expanded far beyond simple concerts. Thomas and Alina now facilitated songwriting workshops for people dealing with grief, addiction recovery, and major life transitions. They visited hospitals, senior centers, and community shelters, bringing music to people who needed its healing power most. Thomas had discovered that his own experience with professional failure and personal rebuilding gave him unique insight into helping others navigate their darkest moments. Elena's influence on Thomas's life extended far beyond their musical partnership. Over the past year, their friendship had deepened into something more profound and intimate. They had fallen in love gradually, naturally, built on a foundation of shared values and mutual respect for each other's artistic gifts. Elena had never tried to fix Thomas or push him toward goals that weren't his own. Instead, she had simply created space for him to rediscover his authentic musical voice. Their relationship. It taught Thomas that love could be supportive without being possessive, inspiring without being demanding. Unlike his previous relationship with Rebecca, which had been built partly on creative dependency, his connection with Elena enhanced both of their individual artistic abilities while creating something beautiful together. That evening's concert was special because Thomas was premiering a song cycle he had been working on for months. 5 interconnected pieces that told the story of his journey from creative despair to renewed purpose. Elena had composed piano accompaniments that perfectly complemented his guitar work and vocal melodies. The cycle was honest about the pain of failure while celebrating the possibility of transformation and growth. "Before I begin tonight," Thomas said to the audience, "I want to tell you something about why these songs exist. 3 years ago, I thought my musical life was over. I had lost my career, my confidence, and my ability to create. I was living in silence, convinced that I had nothing left to offer the world through music." He paused, looking at Elena, who smiled encouragingly from her position at the piano. Then someone moved in next door and started playing piano. Music reminded me that songs don't exist to make us famous or wealthy. They exist to help us connect with each other, to share our experiences, and to remind us that we're not alone in whatever we're going through. Thomas began the song cycle with a piece called Silent Rooms, which captured the isolation and despair of his lowest period. His voice, now stronger and more expressive than it had ever been during his commercial career, conveyed the raw emotions of that dark time without self-pity or dramatic overstatement. The second song, Through the Walls, told the story of hearing Elena's piano and feeling the first stirrings of creative hope. Elena's accompaniment was particularly beautiful here, her piano seeming to have conversations with Thomas's guitar as the song progressed. The third piece, Learning to Listen, explored how Thomas had discovered the healing power of music through Elena's therapy work. The lyrics describe the revelation of watching elderly residents find their voices through song and realizing that music's greatest power lay in its ability to serve others. Finding My Voice was the fourth song, an uplifting anthem about rediscovering creativity through connection and community. The melody was strong and confident, reflecting Thomas's gradual return to musical self-assurance. The final song, Home and Harmony, celebrated the life he and Elena had built together and the musical community they had created. Love song and a tribute to everyone who had supported their journey toward healing and purpose. As the song cycle concluded, the audience responded with extended applause, but more importantly, Thomas could see that his music had once again created genuine, emotional connections. Several people were crying, others were smiling with recognition, and everyone seemed to understand that they had experienced something authentic and meaningful. During the informal reception after the concert, Thomas was approached by a young woman named Sarah who reminded him of himself during his darkest period. She was a songwriter who had recently experienced a major career setback and was struggling with creative block and depression. "Your music tonight gave me hope that maybe my musical life isn't over," Sarah told him. "I've been feeling like such a failure, but hearing your story reminds me that sometimes we need to lose our way before we can find our true path." Thomas spent nearly an hour talking with Sarah, sharing practical advice about navigating creative recovery while offering the emotional support he wished he had received during his own difficult period. He gave her Elena's contact information and invited her to attend their next songwriting workshop. These interactions had become a regular part of Thomas's life, His openness about his own struggles and recovery had made him a resource for other artists facing similar challenges. He found deep satisfaction in helping people understand that creative failure didn't have to mean permanent defeat. Later that evening, as Thomas and Alina cleaned up after the concert, they reflected on how much their lives had changed and grown over the past 2 years. Their musical partnership had evolved into a small but thriving organization that brought healing music to hundreds of people throughout their community. "Do you ever miss your old career?" Alina asked as they loaded equipment into Thomas's car. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I miss some aspects of it," he said honestly. The financial security was nice, and there was something exciting about reaching large audiences. But I don't miss the pressure, the competition, or the way commercial. Success started to matter more than the music itself. He paused, looking up at the clear night sky. "What we're doing now feels more important and more satisfying than anything I achieved during my successful years. Our audiences might be smaller, but the connections are deeper. The music serves a purpose beyond entertainment." Alina smiled and took his hand. "I'm proud of what we've built together," she said, "and I'm proud of the man you've become. Your willingness to transform your pain into something that helps others is remarkable." As they drove home through the quiet streets, Thomas reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. The professional failure that had once seemed like the end of his story had actually been the beginning of a more meaningful chapter. Alina's music had initially provided the soundtrack for his healing, but their partnership had evolved into something that benefited entire communities of people seeking connection and hope. Thomas now understood that true success in music and in life wasn't measured by external achievements, but by the depth of connections created and the positive impact on others' lives. His songs might never again top the charts or fill stadiums, but they were touching hearts and changing lives in ways that felt infinitely more valuable. At home in their shared apartment, they had moved in together. 6 months earlier, Thomas and Alina sat at their respective instruments for their nightly practice session. But tonight, instead of working on separate pieces, they improvised together, their music flowing naturally between piano and guitar, creating melodies that expressed their gratitude for the journey that had brought them together and the community they had helped create. Their music filled the apartment and drifted through the walls to their neighbors, perhaps inspiring someone else who needed to hear that darkness was temporary and that beautiful music could emerge from the most broken places. Thomas had learned that sometimes losing everything was the only way to discover what truly mattered, and that the most profound songs often came from the deepest struggles. As Alina's piano and his guitar found their final harmonious chord of the evening, Thomas knew that his musical story was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning.